So, about a week ago, this interview with Microsoft head honcho Satya Nadella came out, and it was mostly pretty basic stuff. These interviews like rarely have anything noteworthy in them, but this time we did have something that I thought was fairly interesting. So, I posted this on my social media accounts in this screenshot. I'll also put a link in the description to the Windows Central article that I pulled this screenshot from. But we're going to look at this screenshot. I'm going to read you what he said because it's a real head scratcher. It's a real thinker. There's a lot to unpack here. So this first bit up here isn't super duper relevant. We're just going to read these last two paragraphs. When asked to discuss a regretful strategic mistake, Nadella also mentions the company's unexpected exit from mobile phones, while further indicating that there might have been avenues available to avoid culling the whole division. This next bit is Satya actually himself talking. Quote, "The decision I think a lot of people talk about, and one of the most difficult decisions I made when I became CEO, was our exit of what I'll call the mobile phone as defined then. In retrospect, I think there could have been ways we could have made it work by perhaps reinventing the category of computing between PCs, tablets, and phones." So what we have in effect here is Nadella expressing regret in just simply saying we're done with phones instead of trying to find another way to gain a foothold. I don't think this is an admission that Windows Phone itself, like they should have just kept making slab style phones like you see here. I think this is him saying we should have tried to reinvent things a little bit more. And the irony here is that years later, they would release the Surface Duo and, in effect, try to reinvent smartphones once again, but strangely enough, not actually support it. The team working on it was not very large. They didn't put any advertising behind it at all. They sort of limped it out, put out a second one, and the third one may never come out. It's very odd to me to hear him speak about perhaps reinventing the category of computing between PCs, tablets, and phones, knowing full well they released a device that is maybe the best example of an attempt to do that I can think of, while also not putting any weight behind it. So it's very odd to me. And I think that kind of takes us to the first thing that I would like to talk about, and it's the question of why would anyone still trust Microsoft at this point? Let's say that some years go by, things restabilize, and Microsoft does say, here is a new folding device. Maybe they don't even call it Surface Duo 3. Maybe it's been so long that they just abandon that name and they just say, here's whatever, the Surface Fold or whatever it might be called, and they release it. And let's say it even looks good. Why would you buy that phone knowing their track record? And people say this all the time about Google. Google cancels things all the time, but they've not canceled phones, right? Like we're on Pixel 8. And before that, we had Nexus devices. Like this is different. Microsoft completely stopped making phones. They canceled an entire operating system. Then they limped out a new phone and then ended that as well. Like, why would you buy a phone from Microsoft given their track record? Personally, I can just tell you, I have no interest in purchasing another phone from Microsoft at this point. Why would I? It just doesn't make any sense at all to me. I can't imagine how great that phone would have to be to actually pull me over and to make me be like, well, here I go again. I'm going to give Microsoft more money on another phone. It would just be unimaginable to me at this point. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. Maybe some of you that have, been long-term Windows Phone users, maybe for you, it would be as simple as bringing Windows Phone back. And that's kind of the second thing that I would want to talk about is if they do make another phone, let's think about what the OS would be. Some of you would love nothing more than to see those live tiles once again, but unfortunately, I just think that's absolutely not what's going to happen. I don't think this is going to happen, period, personally, not at least for a good long while, but if and when they do produce another phone, it's going to be Android. Like, that's just the fact of the matter. They're not going to make their own operating system with this, okay? They've canceled so many OSs in the last 5 or 6 years, it's not even funny. They're not going to start making another one. Android is going to be their operating system. If they went and tried to make another Windows phone, it would have all the same hurdles to jump as it did before, right? You don't have an app store to compete. That's the big one. If you don't have that app store, you're just not going to be competitive. And people would say, well, maybe have your Windows phone and maybe have it be able to run Android apps. I would say to you, though, that has been tried many, many times and it has never made any dent at all. It's not making a dent on Windows. I believe that BlackBerry tried it. I believe that Windows Phone might have even started to try it. Maybe they didn't ship it, but like companies have tried this in the past. And it just doesn't matter because the biggest problem is you don't have access to the Play Store, which means most of or a large percentage of the important apps aren't going to run correctly. So take the dream of Windows Phone coming back and with like 99% certainty, just put that away because again, you relaunch it with all the same problems it had before, you're going to have the exact same result as you had before. An OS that some people are going to really like, but it's never going to have broad appeal. iOS and Android are it. They have a stranglehold on the market. You're not going to loosen that stranglehold. So it would be Android. Now, we've also heard little bits of talking about Microsoft experimenting or thinking about making their own Android app store. And this may kind of also point us in the direction of them using Android, but trying to control it a bit more. Personally, I think this is a terrible idea because you're essentially taking Android and saying, hey, what if it was Android, but it had the biggest problem with Windows Phone, which was the lack of apps? Look at an Amazon Fire tablet or something like that. Go to their store and tell me that's something that you would want your phone to be restricted to. That no one wants that. And that's exactly, you would have that, but worse in this situation because it'd be starting brand new. So if they do go with Android, they've got to just be Android and have the Play services and use the Google Play Store, or just like a potential Windows Phone rebirth, they would indeed be dead in the water. Again, going back to the beginning of this video, perplexingly, they launched the device already that is exactly what they are describing. Go back in time a few years, take Surface Duo, maybe 4 years, take the Surface Duo, quadruple the size of your team, put the money into it that you need to put into it, actually commit yourselves to it, make sure when it releases, it's maybe in the state that it was 18 months after launch. By that logic, then Duo 2 would be considerably better than it was when it launched. And now you have a pretty good Duo, a pretty great Duo 2, and then launch the Duo 3 in a really good position, and you might actually have a 1% foothold in market share for mobile phones, which is, let's be honest, we're competing against Samsung and Apple. 1% would be pretty cool to get after like 3 years. What does the Pixel have now? Like 5%, 4%, something like that. So, but you have to actually commit yourself to it. And I'm beating my head against the wall talking about this, but they have the device. They just didn't try. They just didn't execute. And it's crazy for me to read these quotes from Satya, knowing what Surface Duo was, knowing that it existed, and knowing what they did with it and what they didn't do with it. So guys, that's about all of the rant that I have on this subject, but I would love to hear from some of you Windows Phone veterans what your feelings and thoughts are on this subject. Sound off in the comments down below. Perhaps consider subscribing before you leave as well, so that you will see the next video on this channel. I'll see you in that next video, and until next time, stay nerdy.